So I think making yourself available as a leader, being open to these ideas when people put them on the table, not being afraid to sort of give it a go.
What does sustainability look like from the executive suite? We got an inside look at the IS Connect 26 conference in Brisbane when we spoke with Graeme Newton. Graeme is CEO of the Cross River Rail Delivery Authority, Brisbane's largest ever infrastructure project. Formerly lead partner at Deloitte and CEO of Queensland Water, Graeme has extensive experience leading successful sustainability teams from the top. We're here at IS Connect 26 in Brisbane, and we're here with Graeme Newton. Graeme, tell us a little bit about your role.
I'm the CEO of the Cross River Rail Delivery Authority. So we're delivering a suite of rail projects in southeast Queensland. Probably the most dominant of that is the tunnel underneath the CBD and underneath the river. So we're digging a 6 kilometre tunnel, but we're also doing a whole bunch of other rail projects. So stabling yards, station upgrades, rail improvement and digital signalling network. Yep.
So I understand this is the largest infrastructure project in Queensland history, but we're also seeing that it's a very sustainable project as well. At what point did sustainability enter the conversation as part of this project?
It was right at the front. So it was part of the procurement process when we went through tender. It was part of the obligations that the contractors had to incorporate into it. And it looks right across the life of the project. So it's not just the the materials or the build, it's part of the design and so forth.
And what were the priorities that you were really trying to achieve?
Well, Queensland has, a bit of an interesting climate. It can be hot and humid and we don't really have much of a winter, so you've got to be able to respond to that environment. But the other priorities were really, with construction nowadays, there's a lot of emissions get quantified as part of, a lot of concrete gets used, a lot of steel gets used. So how do you build what you need to build, but build it in a way where you're conscious of those attributes and those inputs?
How did you make the decision between what would be regulatory and required versus what you wanted to achieve as outcomes that were essentially voluntary on the project?
Well, regulatory requirements are mandatory, but what we always wanted to do was go a cut above that. And that was the way we put it to the contractors when they went through their bid process. And, to their credit, they've been thinking about it all the way through.
And the IS rating was designated for this, so you've got several projects that did really well under the IS rating. What was the idea behind that? Why did you seek out an IS rating in the first place?
Well, I think it's part of being part of a wider community. We want to demonstrate that we have taken this seriously. Best way to do that is through an IS rating and get a third party to quantify it and put ourselves and our contractors in a position where they have to demonstrate that they have actually complied with what they said. So it's not just lip service, we're getting a validation from a third party.
And this project is, because of its scale and it's working inside an existing city, you had quite a few stakeholders involved in the project. How did you navigate the stakeholder process, reaching out to them, making sure they were part of that process?
Yeah, look, that was an important part, and it's quite a diverse project. We've got suburban areas where we're working relatively close to people who are living in detached dwellings. But in the city, we're surrounded by unit apartments. So Albert Street Station has over 5,000 residents living in close proximity. So we're regularly receiving comments and issues from them. But probably the key is actually transparency, engaging with them early, giving them an insight of where things are going. If things aren't going according to plan, getting back to them and telling them that, and being honest about why and what's going on.
I wanted to talk about your role in this process, because a lot of times, of course, in the industry, we hear from the sustainability departments, we hear that from the contractors in the field, but your perspective on sustainability is the one that we don't often hear. For you, what are your real priorities that make sustainability work for you?
Well, delivery of the project is the number one priority, but that doesn't mean delivery at any cost. And we are part of the community. We are delivering a piece of government infrastructure, which is effectively for the people of Queensland and the people of Australia. So there's a duty of care, if you like, a duty of responsibility there to sort of go, well, how do we do this in a way which is sustainable, or as sustainable as can possibly be done, minimise those impacts, but get the job done. and not put an overt cost burden. Do it in a way where it's actually thought about up front, incorporated into the project. And I guess in my role, it's about setting that expectation early and then making sure that sort of permeates through all of the contracts.
Is that a big part of the procurement process, I imagine? Because we're seeing procurement as being one of the bottlenecks right now.
Yeah, procurement is a key element of that, where if you state upfront what your expectations are, but you also allow the contractors and the bidders and the designers to innovate. We've seen on our stations the way in which they've gone about the design. The front doors of the station are very sympathetic to the Queensland environment. So they're like large open rooms which allow the light to permeate down. They've got gaps in the glass that goes up to the ceiling, so it's not trapping heat in. It allows air to circulate. So it's not heavily dependent on air conditioning. It allows that sort of natural environment, that natural airflow, but also allowing light to get all the way down to mezzanine level and in some cases down to platform level. All of those things mean you need less generated light and you've got natural light that flows through. But what it does also is it means that people know for wayfinding, they see the light and they move towards the light. Naturally, if you're coming out of a tunnel, you see light, you head into that direction of where the light is. So you've got this natural flow of people, so you don't end up with congestion, you don't end up with the other sort of things that come with large volumes of people moving around particular places.
You touched on finance. Obviously, there is still that perception that sustainability costs rather than saves money. But on your project, for example, one of the initiatives was saving 100,000 tons of spoil, I believe it was, which obviously is spoil is not going off-site or going to waste. And so there's that landfill levy that you're saving. So you're actually saving money on that. Where did you see those advantages of sustainability where you're actually saving money?
Yeah, well, I think the example you talk about there is obviously when you dig a tunnel, there's a lot of dirt. But the good thing about that is it's clean. It's good to be used, and you can use it elsewhere. Fortunately, we were building stabling yards elsewhere in the network, and some of them were flood affected. So being able to use clean fill on those stabling yards was excellent. Being able to raise the level, so when we put the stabling yards for the trains in place, they won't be flood affected anymore. So that's a good example. Another example was recycled glass. It was a bit of an innovation of a local business here where they crush the glass and use it as an alternative to sand for bedding down pipes, storm water drains and things like that. Now, normally that sand would have to be sourced from a quarry or a riverbank somewhere, but being able to use crushed glass as an alternative, I think there was in the order of 10,000 cubic metres of that was used. So it was good to see those sorts of innovations, but there's other things have been woven into, say, into the concrete using microfibres, which adds strength, but which means that you don't need to use as much cement in the mix. So there's a range of ways in which a bit of innovation can actually make some savings. And then the examples I talked about before, just in the architecture around the actual design, letting air flow, letting light flow, all of those things reduce maintenance costs.
I can see why yours was a successful project. You integrated the sustainability in early, you let it lead those innovations, and it ended up to cost savings in the end. Especially that sand example. That's a very good example of circularity, as glass starts off as sand anyway. And
we also had recycled plastics into the conduit pits, things like that. So it's just looking for those opportunities, not necessarily seeing them as a cost, but also looking at over the life of the project and realising that the project is a PPP, public-private partnership. So there's a 25-year maintenance period there for the contractors. So it sort of drives them to go, well, how do they drive down their maintenance costs? But then the legacy is for the state afterwards, because those benefits continue onwards.
Right, through operations, right. Were there any benefits related to sustainability for the people working on the project?
Yeah, look, I think the insights that people get, and you can see that translating into other projects. We're seeing Queensland Rail has picked up quite a bit of the innovations as far as some of the materials go. There's also been training, and the other things we've woven into is the accessibility side of things. So really getting an insight involving people with accessibility requirements in the process. We've had an accessibility reference group. All of those things make it easier for people to use the public transport at the end of the day. But what it's done is built a knowledge base, built an insight, and set a new standard for public transport in South East Queensland for what is going to be incorporated. But when you look at it that way, if someone who has an accessibility requirement, be it sight, hearing, mobility or whatever, can use a train rather than having to call a taxi, which is their only other alternative, then you've got one less car on the road. So that sort of kicks on and creates another benefit.
Did you find that there were benefits in retention and morale on site with the people who were actually working there and part of the project?
It's a little bit hard to tell in that regard, but I guess when people see that what they're doing is part of something bigger, if there's a sort of a bit of a moral conscience that comes through with the project, I think that obviously contributes to it. I know our staff working for the Delivery Authority, it's a key part of it, and we've woven that into our values within the organisation.
It sounds like there was empowerment going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you at the end of the day, we've always got to remember we've got to deliver the project, but there's no reason why things like this have to be seen as an added burden. They can be part of what actually motivates people.
On projects, especially IS-rated projects, we're looking for senior management to be involved in the process all along. How involved were you in the sustainability process and initiatives?
Well, I set the expectation early on through different contacts. I mean, I was contacted initially through a person that I knew for the glass, and put that to our team and said, can we look into it? So I think making yourself available as a leader, being open to these ideas when people put them on the table, not being afraid to sort of give it a go. I mean, we were in a very broad sense, we were contacted by Queensland Treasury Corporation about the green bonds, and they approached us and said, could we help them formulate the detail around the project, because that allows them to go out into the wider finance market and source funds, because there's some lending bodies who only want to lend into sustainability type projects, and being able to put an electrified railway through a tunnel through the city, it fits right into that sort of mould that they were looking for. So we're able to incorporate our multi-billion-dollar project into their green bond borrowing capacity.
Oh, that's fantastic. So this has been, I'm sure, a long and difficult and rewarding project. What are your takeaways that you would be able to offer to the next project and say, this is what we learned, this is what you should do?
Yeah, look, I think the idea is to understand with these projects, they are very long-lived, and having that in mind at the start. This one's been longer lived than I would have expected it to be. We've had a cyclone, 2 floods, a pandemic. We've had 3 elections, 6 ministers. And we've had hyper escalation, and then the war in Ukraine has contributed. So there's a whole bunch of things that you really, when you start out, you didn't know that you were going to be coming up against. But the reward involved in working on a project of this scale is really there, and to see it unfold, go from what is a design in the mind's eye, which is in a 3D image that gets created. And I just walked past Albert Street to come over here this morning, and I look up at the canopy that's out the front of Albert Street, and it just gives your heart a little bit of a lift to know that you had something to do with the creation of something that is going to really change the face of the city forever.
I understand Brisbane's population is growing quite a bit. It's supposed to reach something like 4.9 million by 2036. What's the next step?
There's a bit of a buzz around the Olympics. Now, the Olympics is, people talk about the Olympics and the stadium and those projects, but there's $48 billion worth of rail projects that are actually happening in southeast Queensland, so it kind of dwarfs that. There's a lot of housing projects, hospital work going on. In our space, the rail side of things, the connection to the Sunshine Coast and the Gold Coast, the enhancement of the rail system to make it more seamless, and anybody who's been in southeast Queensland around peak hour driving to the Sunshine Coast or the Gold Coast would much rather not be sitting in that car park that it can become. So particularly those people who commute. So the idea is to create a spine, if you like, a connection to the Sunshine Coast and Gold Coast, and that's where the population growth corridors are, allowing people that choice, getting more frequent services on there, and making sure that that's an attractive alternative. And rather, if you're moving around the southeast, you're really taking that option of train as your most efficient method. And it's probably reflective of the nature of Brisbane and southeast Queensland. It's growing, and it's really at that stage of maturity where you would see in major cities, London, Paris, New York or whatever, where you wouldn't get in a car. we're on the cusp of that, where the choice of how you get around it's been predominantly car, but now we're getting to the stage where population growth, car parking, traffic means that you really want to start thinking about alternatives.
We've seen so many tunneling projects starting to enter into infrastructure. It seems to be a convenient way to get through cities now. How do you see the tunneling process, and do you feel like that's the future of a lot of infrastructure projects in urban environments?
Yeah, having seen how our contractors went about the tunneling, and I've been and visited quite a few of the other projects as well too. I mean, the innovation that's evolved with tunnel boring machines and the way in which they get through the tunnelling is quite astounding. I mean, there's been a couple of mishaps along the way with some of the more notable projects, but mostly it's a very reliable way to do things. And if you compare, I mean, even as recently as when they did the Channel Tunnel, the methodology they used then was so different to what we're using now. So I see it as continuing to evolve. And as you say, with the demands and it becoming really the way of choice to get through heavy cities rather than putting viaducts in or larger roads, I can see the innovation and the insights just growing in that space.
How are you using AI on the project, or how do you see AI being used in the future?
Yeah, well, AI is sort of fairly new, and we've got to work out how does it fit into the scheme of things. We have been using it to some extent in our corporate side of things. We are using it in relation to project controls. It's still at its infancy, and we've spent a fair bit of effort on developing 3D models and going down the path with the digital twin. I can see AI, the digital twin, programming, scheduling, I can see that all starting to converge. We're a little way off that just yet, but I can see that as being something where having the data and then having the ability to interrogate it, and then when those things hit, like I talked about before, being able to put shocks into the system and work out, well, what does that mean, and then come up with alternative options more rapidly than currently requiring an expert in the corner to do it. You've sort of got somebody to aid the expert. Someone's, at the end of the day, still got to drive the machine. AI can do a bunch of things, but at this stage, I think you still need to have that insight to be able to feed the question into the AI.
Well, it's been great speaking with you. Speaking to the people who are actually working on the project on the sustainability side as part of the IS rating, I've noticed that they're very excited about the project, and a lot of that success comes from the leadership that they have. And so speaking to you, I can see why.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, look, it's we're really engaged with the ISCA, and they've been wonderful all the way through, helping us go through that rating process and get an understanding of what it is that ISCA sees as sustainability and how we overlay that with the project and what we're doing there.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Infrastructure Connections. Please follow us wherever you get your podcasts and drop us a comment to let us know what you think. Stay tuned for the next episode of Infrastructure Connections.